Hi, I'm Ward Silver. I'm 61 years old and I live in St. Charles, Missouri. And I'm primarily a technical editor and writer for the National Association for Amateur Radio in the United States.
You used to live in Ferguson, St. Louis. In Germany, we heard a lot about the riots there. Maybe you can try to describe how Ferguson is shaped and what led to the violence there.
Okay, yeah, I lived in Ferguson for a couple of years back in the early 80s, and I lived in St. Louis for a long time before that. Ferguson is what we would call a ring suburb, and it was typical of many of the municipalities here in the St. Louis area. We have almost 90 different small cities or towns in the St. Louis area, and they all are separate municipalities. Ferguson was at one time a suburb with families that were moving out of the city, and over time those families kept moving west and Ferguson became poorer. And when I lived there, it was a mix of white and black, and it still is in a lot of places. It's typical of these municipalities in the area. As the municipalities became poorer, they all had to maintain their own city administrative structure and government, and so they all fell into this bad habit of increasing their revenues through the court systems because they could, speeding tickets, whatever. And as the population became poorer, this became more of a burden on them. And this became kind of typical in the St. Louis area. So what you have is sort of an annoying situation where the people are see the police force as sort of a harassing force to get revenue. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's sort of the perception. So people were upset. People felt opposed to their own government. And when the young man was shot, Michael Brown, it set off an outpouring of anger. And there was a lot of discussion that came out of this. Of course, you have the young man who was shot. You have the police officer who was actually involved in the shooting. Then you had the back and forth between the population and the police department. And finally, you have this resolution between Ferguson and the federal government, who were called in to investigate and make recommendations. And so if there is to be anything good that came out of the riots, it's an increased awareness in this area of what using your police force to raise revenue does to the population, and why this is an inefficient and ineffective form of government. So we have a multi-year process that's beginning here now to start to resolve some of these issues. We're still grappling with what's an appropriate form of local municipality control versus a regional. And St. Louis has a long history of racial separation and segregation, and so we're grappling with that as well. The conversation is ongoing. It's going to take years and years to resolve, but at least it's out in the open. People are starting to have honest discussions about it now. I think eventually it's for the good, although in the meantime it's very difficult.
What role does the Black Lives Matter movement play in the election campaign? What do you think?
In the election here, the national election or the local election?
Maybe both.
Well, locally, what has come out of Ferguson and Florissant and all the other little municipalities are a number of people who were activists, I guess you would say. And this politically awakens people. And so in Ferguson, for example, the elections that took place after the riots and all the trouble, you got much more black representation on the city council, and so they're more involved with their government now. That there's some back and forth, and everybody has to get used to that, but I think that's going to be a good thing. And so that will continue. It's spawned a lot of interest in government in these municipalities by the minorities and the population, and it's shaking up the political structure here in St. Louis. That's a good thing. On the national level, I think it's very hard to make broad characterizations, but I think it's not only has it started a conversation on the national level, it's also started a large backlash. And so people, you know how topics spin out of control and they're not as they seem, and the initial conversation gets changed, the initial circumstances are lost, and you get into this big national thing. There is a fair amount of backlash against the Black Lives Matter people. And so you get people who disagree, they see the disobedience, they see the riots, they don't see the justification for it. They're not intimately connected with the circumstances of the people on the ground here. And so you get this, well, all lives matter. And you get, well, police lives matter because Black Lives Matter, the activists and the protests are rightly or wrongly connected with some attacks on police, like in Baton Rouge and Dallas and other places. And so the police are feeling like they're caught in the middle. They have a job to do, but on the other hand, they're also having to deal with a fairly angry, upset, highly armed population, and so their job is much more difficult. And as is the usual case, the vast majority of police want to do a good job. And they're good guys and gals, but they're put in a very difficult spot. So you have this. We're in an unstable state right now. We're having this conversation. We haven't really settled on what to do about it, where to go with it. I think ultimately it's healthy. It's a good thing. You don't get these conversations started out of niceness. Generally, something bad has to happen, and then you have to deal with why did this happen? Where do we go from here? So it's unfortunate, but I think in the long term, it'll be good for the country. Is it affecting the election? Yes, it is. I think the people that are opposed to the Black Lives Matter movement are generally on one side of the fence, and people that are more or less endorsing it are on the other. And so you have a kind of a polarization in this particular sphere. So yes, and of course both sides are politicizing it. Gee, what a surprise. But yeah, it's having an effect.
Donald Trump talks a lot about how he will make the country better. What do you think? How screwed is the U.S. economy? Because also Hillary talks a lot about how she wants to improve the economy in the U.S.
Well, Donald is a marketer, I'll put it that way. He will say whatever he thinks he needs to say to get people's attention. He doesn't really have issues, he has audiences. I don't really think he has any grasp on what the real fundamentals of the economy are, or that he can fix anything. That pretty much has been substantiated by multiple economists who don't think his plans will have any tangible effect in the direction that he claims they will go. The Republican Party, as for 40 years, followed a path of tax cuts, essentially as a stimulus to the economy. The Democrats tend to lean in the direction of more government programs. Both are what David Brooks, who's a columnist for the New York Times, characterized as two Soviet-era refrigerator companies with obsolete products slugging it out, trying to get you to buy their refrigerators. Both of them are wrong. The Democrats are less wrong, but the real problem, the root cause of what's driving the problems in the economy, the problems are typically associated with circulation. The poorer sections of the economy, the lower half really, has been stagnant or worse for the last 40 years. Starting in Reagan's second term, you can see real income for the lower half of the population slowly dropping, while anybody in the top has done quite well. This is driven by technology, the technology that enables people to communicate, enable people to manage enterprise with less labor, with less clerical help, less middle management. And so the concerns over inequality are real, and they are going to only get worse until we start having a conversation about the effects of technology on the economy. Now, why do people buy into these arguments is a perfectly good question. And I think you have one section, well, of Donald Trump's base who want to hear his message. They want to blame somebody, whether it's minorities, whether it's immigrants, whether it's rich people. The easiest message of all time to sell to human beings is, it's not your fault, it's their fault. And he's making that argument. It's not true, but that doesn't matter. The other part is we have a tremendous number of people in this country, and not only in this country, but in other developed economies as well, who are being displaced by technology, whether it's automation, whether it's machinery, whether it's computers. They're basically being thrown out of work, or losing their jobs, or not finding jobs, whatever, because of automation. It's technology is moving ahead. If you look at what it takes to build a railroad, for example, maintain a railroad, where you might have had a crew of 20 workers laying rail, shifting ballast, whatever. Now you have a really large machine and a half dozen workers. So that's typical. So the traditional response to this, to stimulate either through government programs or through taxes, makes the situation worse, because the money is then invested in more technology, which throws more people out of work. So these people really feel like they're lost. They have not gotten any attention. They've been thrown off the economic bus, and there's no hope. The government really can't help. The private industry seems to be dominated by the need to apply more technology to this. And so they don't care. Donald's the only one that talks to them in a language they understand, and so that's basically the guy that they're going for. Hillary, on the other hand, I think has much better handle on what the problem is, and has a lot of programs, but she's having trouble communicating that to these same people. It's a very much more complicated technical conversation, and so it doesn't resonate emotionally with these people. I think what they're going to find, unfortunately, is if Donald Trump is elected, they'll have no jobs, no safety net, no health care, and be far worse off than they were before. Hillary's solutions aren't going to be instant either. All this is going to take a long time. It's taken us 40 years to get here. It's going to take more than one election cycle to get us out. The most important thing we can do is to turn down the rhetoric at this point and start having an adult conversation about it.
At the end, we kind of ask everyone what their forecast for the election is. What do you think, who will win and why?
Well, I think Hillary's going to pull it out with a narrow victory. The Electoral College is something that's kind of unique to American governance, and she'll probably win like with a 30 or 40 electoral vote margin. That's not enough to really give her a mandate for change, and there is a significant risk that the people on the losing side will not accept it. And so we'll have some kind of a legal challenge to this, and it can go on for a while. It can go on for a couple of months, as we saw in 2000. That could be difficult. People are angry, people are divided to a greater degree than in 2000, and I don't know where it will go. Let's assume that cooler heads prevail and we get a resolution of this and things are proceeding along normally. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get a lot of change out of the government. We've already heard that if the Republicans lose, they're going to revert to the obstruction we've seen for the last 8 years. And Hillary is very good at working with the other side, as she's shown over her career. So if anybody can reach out and get some useful motion out of this, it's probably her. That's what I think is going to happen. There are a lot of black swans flying around, and who knows what could really happen. So to me, I think we have a time of great risk here in the United States. I don't see the country coming apart. I don't see a civil war. I just see some very difficult times ahead until we can get our political act back together to the point where we can actually discuss the problems and the challenges that we face, and they're big ones, and then start to devise some kind of compromise solution that a majority of the country can get behind and see if it works or not, and then make adjustments from there. So we shall see. Come back in a few years and ask.